So we're concluding the Incarnation series. I'm just looking at it as though I'm presenting a thought here today that involves a lot more questions than answers, so to speak. The one question said the first week was a question referring to if there had not been a fall, would Jesus still have come, needed to come, however you want to phrase that and see it. And we talked a little bit about it in the first week, and so I'm going to start from a position of no, that he wouldn't have come. Implies three things. Now, it probably implies more, but these are the three things that came to my mind that it implies. Number one, that the Incarnation is all about atonement and salvation, which you could pose an argument for from Matthew, when the angel tells Joseph the situation is true and it's real in the whole thing. When he says, you shall call his name Jesus, he will save his people from their sins. Well, that's pretty clear. So he came to save their people from their sins. But it also says in the same passage about Emmanuel. So what about Emmanuel? If it was just about atonement, then God is with us. Why is he remaining with us and in us after the sacrifice, after the atonement? Is it only about being saved from, which is the way people generally think? I think if you asked a lot of Christians about salvation, they would be very quick to refer to their salvation from all these different things, whether it be sin, hell, whatever. But what about being saved to? What about that side of it? Because if you're saved from something, salvation is about being saved to him as well. But what about that? Is it only about Incarnation's death that humanity might have life? I mean, what about his life? I mean, if you think about it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, and this is where I pray to God that I don't speak in a confusing way, but when we look at the atonement, and if we say that the Incarnation was only for the atonement, the cross, we're kind of like negating 33 years of his life. So was that, chopped liver? Did that mean anything? And then we also kind of don't really get a very clear picture of the resurrection either, on both sides of the cross, because we're so focused on the cross, the atonement. I think these are things that have plagued the church. We're so busy all the time trying to lead people to the death, to the atonement, that we're totally not presenting the life the way he could be presented and the power of the resurrection. But anyway, so to say no, the first thing was, the Incarnation is all about atonement and salvation, so he wouldn't have had to come. What about the revelation of God, and ourselves for that matter, which we've talked about? Would that revelation of God just have evolved without the interference or the impact of sin? Knowing him, would we have, if we had committed ourselves to knowing him instead of good and evil? Because remember, the tree that got us in trouble, got humanity in trouble, was a seeking for the knowledge of good and evil instead of getting to know him. There's knowledge is involved in both. It's just who and what you want to know. So if we hadn't eaten from that tree, so to speak, and spent time knowing him, would our likeness, remember we're made in the image and likeness, we're becoming like him, so would that likeness have evolved? Would it have developed because there was no impact of sin? But then the question from my point of view is, okay, but is becoming like him, is that the message that Jesus preached as the reason, purpose, or goal of salvation? Is that the finished work that he was talking about in John 17 when he said, I finished the work? Is that the work he was sent to do? Is that why salvation came? What about relationship? In other words, you can have a revelation and still have no relationship. So to say no implies three things. The Incarnation is all about atonement. The revelation of God would have evolved. We would have got to know him more and more and gotten to know ourselves, that whole thing. And the relationship would have developed and matured with no separation, regardless of how we perceive separation, sin, that whole thing. But is that what Jesus described in John 17? Again, I keep referring to John 17. What would it have evolved into? If you say the relationship, would it evolved into the relationship that Jesus describes in John 17? You may, depending on how often you've read it and how familiar you are with his prayer in John 17, you would know that the word one is a very important word. If somebody's in John 17, just read verse 11, please.
And I am no more in the world, and yet they themselves are in the world. And I come to thee, Holy Father, keep them in thy name, the name which thou hast given me, that they may be one, even as we are.
So he introduces this idea of being one in verse 11. In verse 21, he says, as you, Father, are in me and I am in you, that they also may be one in us. Now I'm trying to bring this relationship, because this relationship is more than like two people walking along. That's not what he's describing. He's describing something else. Verses 22 and 23.
The glory which you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, just as we are one. I and them, you and me, that they may be perfected in unity, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them, even as you have loved me.
He seems to insinuate, more than insinuate, say that this relationship of love means more than just, I love you, you love me, but we become one in the relationship. We're not going to go down that road too far, but he's describing a fulfillment of a love relationship that is far beyond what mankind has ever realized. The love connection, if you would. In verse 24,
Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, be with me where I am, so that they may see my glory which you have given me. For you loved me before the foundation of the world.
that they may be with me, the word with. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And we talked about this before. A word with doesn't mean like two people walking along a path. It means two people that are constantly coming together, closer and closer, like when you're dancing. There's movement and motion involved. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. They were like in this eternal dance. And the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. John states it twice, the withness. Now Jesus is praying and said that they may be with me in the eternal dance together, them and me and them, I and them, I and you and me and, he's describing something so restricted to words, but he throws it in the category of glory. He introduces the glory, that they may be with me where I am. Well, you can't miss the fact that in John 14, earlier in the evening, he told them, I go to prepare a place for you, so that where I am, which is in the Father, it's not heaven, it's in the Father. I go to prepare a place for you in my Father's house. We know what the house is. There are many mansions. He's already talked about the where. It's in the Father. And now he's talking here, that's where I am, and that's where I want them to be. He's presenting something much huger and praying about something much bigger in John 17. And he even says before the foundation of the world. So now he has taken us outside of time into eternity. God only knows what that is. We don't. Now you can go to a lot of prophets, and I was taken up. God bless you. I really mean that. May the glory of God fill your life. Wonderful. But what Jesus is praying about, where he was, so to speak, what that all means is so far outside of our ability to even begin to kind of like comprehend. We receive it in the Spirit as something that the Spirit imparts to us that just kind of goes, and our eyes roll back in our heads as we try to somehow grasp what he's talking about. And he's saying, but you don't need to grasp it. You don't really need to grasp it. You just need to listen to me. That there's a lot more going on than you think. And I guess that's where I kind of struggle a bit with the whole incarnation salvation thing, is that salvation is a worthy subject to be consumed with from our end. But is that what God was consumed with when he actually came to earth in the incarnation? Is that what he was really consumed about? Was God's plan all along to connect heaven and earth in Christ? The latter that John presents right away. Because remember, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. There's a separation. You could read about it in Genesis 1. Was that a permanent state? Or was the whole idea for the incarnation, the expression of eternity, to come into time come from a place, the glory, from before the foundation of the world, and connect this world to that one, so to speak? Was there something much, much bigger in the incarnation that we don't talk about or think about? And please, I hope that I don't get misunderstood. I am in no way wanting to appear that salvation is a minimal subject. I'm not saying that. I guess what I want to say is it's just part of the incarnation, though. To put everything in the incarnation into the bank of salvation, I think we miss a lot more than the revelation Paul had, Peter, John, because they were talking the language I'm talking right now. But it's so far outside the box. You know, Israel just wanted the Christ to come and give them a kingdom on this earth where they would be numero uno. And that was the extent of their thinking. And God had so much more in store than that. Would glorification of God in humanity, which Philippians 2, would that have evolved, I guess is part of one of the questions. Would this glorification that Jesus prayed about, that Paul talked about, that they all talked about, was that on the drawing board, and that's what it was about? Would we have become one, like Jesus is praying? Would humanity's bridal dance, as best I could describe it, the bridal dance, with the Father, and then with the bridegroom. Don't you love that picture?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's just like, hello, there's going to be a bridal dance. The bridal dance in the Trinity. Dancing with the Father, and he passes you over to the Son, and you're dancing.
Yeah.
It's like, hello. Would that have evolved?